There is a person. They are standing at a crossroads. Not literally, but in that invisible way that happens inside a person's chest when they look at their life and realize something is different about them. Not wrong, different. This person has watched the people around them collect friendships the way other people collect furniture, filling every room, filling every weekend, filling every quiet moment before it has a chance to breathe. And somewhere along the way, this person tried to do the same. They went to the gatherings. They made the small talk. They stayed until it was acceptable to leave. And then they drove home, alone, and felt relief. Not guilt, not sadness, relief. And that relief confused them, because the world had been very clear about what it means when you prefer the quiet, when the circle stays small, when the phone doesn't ring much and you don't particularly want it to. The world calls that lonely. The world calls that broken. The world calls that something to fix. But here is the question no one asks. What if the world has been measuring the wrong thing this entire time? What if the person driving home in silence, the one who keeps few friends, or maybe no close friends at all, what if that person is not behind? What if they are operating on a level that most people spend their whole lives trying and failing to reach? What if they are not the rare exception to the rule? What if they are the rule, the one nobody wrote down? Stay with this, because what comes next is going to dismantle something most people have never thought to question. Part 1. The lie that got told very early. It starts young, very young. A child walks into school, and within hours the invisible measuring begins. How many friends do you have? Not, are you kind? Not, are you honest? Not, do you know who you are? How many friends? The child who sits alone at lunch gets watched, gets whispered about, gets a note sent home. The child surrounded by 10 other screaming children gets called well-adjusted, and something gets planted in that moment, a seed. The belief that the number of people around you is a direct measure of your worth as a human being. That more equals better. That popular equals healthy. That alone equals broken. This seed doesn't stay in the schoolyard. It grows. It follows people into their 20s, into their 30s, into the middle of their lives. It shows up at parties when someone stands near the wall, drink in hand, watching the room and feeling like something is fundamentally wrong with them. It shows up on a Sunday afternoon when the apartment is quiet and the world outside seems to be doing something together that this person was not invited to. It shows up in the mirror sometimes. Why can't I just be normal about this? Why does the small talk exhaust me? Why do I feel more alone in a crowded room than I do sitting here by myself? And here is the cruelest part of this lie. The person asking those questions already knows something true. They already know that most of what passes for friendship in the modern world is not actually friendship. They can feel the difference between being known and being present in the same room as someone. They are not confused about this. The lie just makes them feel like their clarity is the problem. Part 2. What the research actually says. Here is where it gets interesting. John Cacioppo, psychologist at the University of Chicago, one of the most respected loneliness researchers in the world, spent decades studying what actually makes people feel connected. And what he found directly contradicts everything the world performs on social media. In his own words, it's not the quantity of friends, it's the quality of a few relationships that actually matter. That is not a motivational quote. That is a research conclusion from someone who spent a career measuring what loneliness actually is. And here is what he found loneliness actually is. Not the absence of people, the absence of being known. Perceived isolation, the gap between the connection you have and the connection you actually need. A person surrounded by 30 acquaintances who none of them truly see them. Lonelier, measurably, neurologically lonelier than a person with one real friendship. 1. Not 30, not 21, and this is where it gets darker. Because maintaining a wide social circle costs something. Time, energy, emotional bandwidth. Every hour spent managing the surface of 20 relationships is an hour not spent going below the surface of any of them. It becomes a math problem with a brutal answer. The more people you perform connection for, the less actual connection you have. You end up surrounded but unknown, seen by many, understood by none. The person with the quiet phone made a different calculation. Maybe not consciously, maybe not with a plan. But their life arranged itself around something more honest. Fewer people, but real ones. And in Cacioppo's framework, That is not the inferior option. That is the only option that actually works. Part 3. Why most people cannot do what you think is ordinary. Here is where the powerful argument begins. And this is the part that matters. Because it is not enough to say quality over quantity. Everyone nods at that. Everyone agrees, and then goes back to accepting every invitation. Texting people they don't particularly like. Maintaining relationships that have been empty for years. Because the alternative is something most people cannot tolerate. The alternative is sitting with the discomfort of a smaller life. And that discomfort is genuinely unbearable for most people. Not as an exaggeration, as a psychological fact. Research on what's called fear of being alone, or more precisely autophobia in its social form, shows that a significant portion of people will choose bad company over no company. Not because they don't know better. Because the silence that comes with an empty social calendar activates something ancient and frightened inside the human nervous system, something that reads solitude as danger, something that was useful when humans lived in tribes, and being cast out meant dying alone in a field. That survival mechanism does not know it is 2026. It just knows the room is quiet. And it panics. So most people, unconsciously, automatically, reflexively, keep filling the room. They say yes when they mean no. They show up when they want to stay home. They maintain the performance because the alternative feels like falling. And here is what that means for the person who does not do this. The person who lets the room go quiet. Who sits with the discomfort long enough for it to stop feeling like danger. Who tolerates the weight of a small circle without immediately reaching for something to fill it. That person has done something that most human nervous systems are wired to prevent. They have overridden a survival instinct, with awareness, with patience, with a kind of self-trust that does not develop without cost. That is not ordinary. That is genuinely rare. Part 4. The ones who call themselves your friend. There is a particular kind of person. They smile at you warmly. They show up at the right moments. They say the right things. And somewhere underneath all of that, they are watching you, measuring you, calculating exactly how far ahead of them you are, and what it would take to close the gap. This person is not your friend. They never were. They are your competitor. And the only difference between them and an open enemy is that they are standing close enough to hurt you properly. This is not a new observation. Francis Bacon wrote about it in 1625. He said that the envious person has no rest, not because they are suffering, but because your success is their suffering. Every good thing that happens to you lands in them like an accusation. Why them and not me? That question does not produce admiration, it produces strategy. And the strategy always looks like friendship, until it doesn't. Here is what envy actually does inside a relationship. It disguises itself perfectly. It shows up as support, the kind that comes with just enough subtle undermining that you almost don't notice. It shows up as advice that steers you slightly wrong in ways that are impossible to trace back. It shows up as loyalty right up until the moment a better opportunity presents itself. And then it shows up as a knife, not in your chest, in your back, where you cannot see it coming because you were busy trusting. Aristotle understood this. He wrote that you cannot be friends with someone who wishes they were you, not because wishing is wrong, but because a friendship built on envy has a hidden load-bearing wall, and that wall is your failure. The moment you succeed in a way they cannot match, the friendship collapses because it was never built on goodwill. It was built on proximity to what they wanted. And once proximity is no longer enough, you become the obstacle, not the companion. The philosopher Helmut Schuk spent years studying envy as a social force. He called it the most camouflaged of all human motivations. Because unlike anger or greed, envy cannot admit itself. An envious person will never say, "I resent your success." They will say, "I'm just being honest with you. I'm just looking out for you. I just think you should be careful." Always reasonable, always concerned, always positioned just close enough to benefit from your trust and disappear before the damage is traced. And here is the part that matters most. The person with few friends, the one this whole script is about, they see this, not always immediately, but they feel it, that faint wrongness in a conversation, The way someone's eyes move when you share good news, the slight pause before congratulations, the compliment that somehow leaves you feeling smaller. These are not imagination. These are data, and the person who keeps a small circle has learned, sometimes through real betrayal, sometimes through years of quiet observation, that someone who sees you as competition cannot see you as a companion. It is neurologically incompatible. You cannot root for someone and resent them simultaneously and call what you feel friendship. One of those will win, and in the envious person, it is never the friendship, so they remove themselves, not with accusations or confrontations. They simply stop. Stop sharing. Stop trusting. Stop offering the access that was being used as ammunition. And the world calls this cold. The world calls this difficult. The world says, why can't you just let people in? But the person with the small circle knows something. The world is too comfortable to say out loud. Letting the wrong person in is not openness. It is self-destruction with a friendly face. A friend is a companion, someone who walks beside you and wants the road to be good for both of you. Not someone who walks beside you, calculating how to get ahead of you. Not someone who smiles at your face and resents your name in private. Not someone whose loyalty has an expiration date tied to your usefulness. The person with few friends did not become selective because they are cold. They became selective because they learned the difference between a companion and a competitor wearing the mask of one. And once you see that difference clearly, once you have felt the specific coldness of a backstab from someone you called a friend, you cannot unsee it. You will not unsee it, and you will not apologize for the clarity it gave you. That clarity has a cost. It shrinks the circle, sometimes down to almost nothing. But what remains, what survives that level of discernment, is something most people spend their whole lives performing but never actually having. A friend who is not your enemy. Simple, rare, worth every empty seat at the table. Part 5. What Aristotle knew that Instagram forgot. Let's go deeper, because this is not just modern psychology. This is ancient. Aristotle wrote about friendship over 2,000 years ago, and he made a distinction that the modern world has almost completely abandoned. He said there are 3 kinds of friendship. Friendships of utility. You are useful to me, I am useful to you, and we call it friendship. Friendships of pleasure. You make me laugh. We enjoy the same things. It feels good while it lasts. And then there is the 3rd kind, the rarest. Friendships of virtue, where 2 people see each other clearly, including the parts that are not easy to look at and choose to remain. Aristotle believed this 3rd kind was so rare and so demanding that most people would experience only a handful in an entire lifetime. Not because something was wrong with them, but because this kind of friendship requires something most people are unwilling to offer. Honesty without the armor of performance, presence without the distraction of convenience, commitment that does not depend on how good you make each other feel. He called these friendships the complete form of friendship, and he said they were slow to form, because they required knowing someone, actually knowing them, which takes time, which takes depth, which takes exactly the kind of investment that is impossible to spread across 40 people. Now, think about the person who keeps few friends. Whether they have read Aristotle or not, they are living inside his framework, not by design, by instinct. Something in them refuses to call it friendship when it is really just convenience. Something in them holds the word to a standard that most people stopped holding it to a long time ago. And because of that standard, the circle stays small, and the world shakes its head. But Aristotle would not. He would recognize exactly what is happening, and he would call it not a deficiency, but a demand for the real thing. In a world full of imitations. Part 6. The myth of the extrovert ideal. Society has a favorite person, and that person is warm, magnetic, lights up every room. That person makes friends effortlessly, remembers everyone's name, thrives at every gathering. This person is everywhere in culture, in leadership frameworks, in self-help books, in the stories told about successful, admirable, together people. And anyone who does not match this template has been quietly handed a self-improvement project. You need to come out of your shell. Push yourself more socially. You'll feel better once you're around people. Said with genuine care often, but also said sometimes by people who are deeply uncomfortable with the idea that someone could genuinely prefer less. Because if a person can genuinely prefer a quieter life, if the small circle is a considered choice and not a wound to fix, then the relentless social activity of the person saying, "You need more people," starts to look less like health and more like avoidance, and that is not comfortable to look at. Psychologist Susan Cain spent years researching this. The cultural bias toward extroversion, the ways introverted people are pathologized, the institutional pressure to perform social energy that does not come naturally. She found that somewhere between a third and half of all people lean introverted, almost half the room. Not a small, strange minority, almost half the room. And yet the whole world is designed for the other half. The open office, the networking event, the team-building exercise, the requirement to be a people person for almost every role that pays well. The quiet person at the edge of the room is not failing to thrive. They are being asked to speak a second language, constantly, and then criticized for having an accent. Somewhere right now there is a person. They are probably not at a party. They might be reading, or walking somewhere, or sitting in the kind of quiet that the world has spent years trying to convince them is a problem. And there is a voice, the world's voice, telling them they are behind, telling them they are missing out, telling them that a life with this much space in it is a life half-lived. But here is what that voice gets wrong. It is measuring the wrong thing. It is counting heads when it should be measuring depth. It is celebrating volume in a domain where volume is precisely what destroys the thing you actually want. The person surrounded by 30 people who none of them truly know them. They are the one living the half-life. The person alone, or nearly alone, who has one conversation that goes somewhere real. Who has looked at the performance and chosen the truth instead? Who has paid the cost year after year of staying honest about what they can actually feel? That person is not behind. They are not a cautionary tale or a self-improvement project or something the world needs to fix. They are the product of a choice that most people are never brave enough, or stubborn enough, or clear-sighted enough to make. And they are rare. The kind of rare that gets mistaken for lonely. The kind of rare that does not come with a celebration or a certificate or even acknowledgement from anyone else. The kind of rare that you only recognize from the inside, when the room is quiet. And instead of panic, there is that feeling again. Relief. That is how you know, not because someone told you, not because a video confirmed it, but because something in you has always known the difference between a life that is full and a life that is yours. And you chose yours, in a world that made that harder than it should have been. That is not nothing. That is everything.